Yo, what up, Street Talk? Zara Kim. Alright, so another turbo thought. So the basic notion is the will to procreation, or the will to creation. So I feel the notion of procreate is interesting because generally when you talk about procreation, we talk about, like, you know, women giving birth essentially. But I think all of us artists, the reason why we like to create is we have this will to procreate. We have this will to, you know, put into existence and to exert our soul, our energies into the world. And then, so one of the questions I think about is, like, why make art? It's kind of related to, like, why have children? So there's a lot of people who don't want to have kids, which is, I think, is, like, totally fine. But for myself personally, I want to have kids and I want to have lots of kids. I mean, insofar much as whatever, like, I mean, for me, I want to at least have, like, maybe, like, you know, at least 2 kids, right? Because that's what I grew up with. And why have kids? So for the most part, honestly, there's not a real, like, practical utilitarian notion of thinking about why having kids. I think it's totally fine. It's just, like, for me, it's an ego thing. It's like, you know, I think I got, you know, I think I'm a, you know, I think I got good genes or whatever, and I want to continue to propagate that. And it's totally ego driven. And even, like, you think about a kid, right? The kid is like a mini version of you. So, like, if you wanted to ever clone yourself, right? Like, you know, some people, they want to clone themselves, live forever. I'm like, yo, you guys are stupid. You guys could just have kids. Like, that's like the most simple, basic way to kind of, you know, pseudo live forever, where as long as your genes propagate and continue to live on, in theory, you live forever, or at least your genes do, and your genetic material, whatever you want to call it. And so, so it seems like the notion is, like, if you're trying to live forever but you don't want to have kids, something's a little bit weird here. But anyways, so there's I think it's just kind of like, part of me, I try not to philosophize too much on this, but I think it's just like a very pragmatic thing is, you know, humans, we have the just natural desire to have sex with other humans, and if we didn't have this innate biological desire, we probably would have all died off a long time ago. And then also similarly, if sexual pleasure didn't feel good, then we probably wouldn't have had babies ever again. So I think in terms of procreation, it's just important for us to just think about the instinctual, the biological. If you like having real sex, like real life sex, then it's a good sign. If you don't like to have real life sex and you like to watch porn instead, I'm not gonna judge. But anyways, so I think assertion here is an interesting point because, like, to the desire to procreate, or at least from the biological sense, is you want to multiply yourself, you want to augment yourself, you want to spread yourself, you want to make yourself bigger. I know, at least in my mom's generation, I think she had like 10 brothers and sisters. So, like, back then it was kind of also practical things too, is that, like, you know, you had kids, you didn't know how many of them would live or die. Even in Korean, there's this culture that, like, I don't think you actually name your kid until they're 100 days old, because there's a high likelihood that they might die before then. And even so, like, when you name them early on, you kind of name them like an ugly name, because you don't want the demons or the spirits to kill off your baby. And also part of it is, you know, a lot of people lived in, like, more like agricultural situations where you just kind of needed more people to till the land and so forth. And so I think these are just kind of practical considerations to think about when it comes to procreation. And yeah, and I think to want to do stuff because of anything, I think that's totally fine and totally legitimate. So if you want to make more art, then I think my thought is, if your goal and your desire is to make more art, and to procreate more artistic works. It does seem that, I don't know, who knows, maybe there is kind of this like connection with physiology, or for like you know, sexual power or prowess and stuff like that. I think there's a kind of like lots of interesting cross-pollination we could think about. And you know, there's the theories in the past, I think these have been, I mean, philosophically they're kind of interesting, is that like, as an artist, if you decide not to ejaculate or whatever, then you reserve more of your creative power for making artwork. So I don't think that's necessarily true. And then it's also interesting too to think about that a lot of artistically prolific men in the past have also been very high sexual energy. So once again, I don't know if this is true or not, but I just find the thought interesting. So when it comes to your life, you know, your life is your life, and just kind of ask yourself, like, do you want to procreate art? How much art do you want to make? How important is it to you? And so the same thing is, like, if having kids to you is important, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to risk? Because obviously you have kids, it's gonna make your life a lot more difficult, and there's no, the notion of having a kid without sacrifice is kind of a silly one, but also in some ways is essentially, it's very selfish, because you're having a kid because of your own ego and you want to propagate yourself. And so essentially you're sacrificing yourself for a future version of you. So let's not be a sucker, let's not be fooled. Essentially it's like a self-serving sacrifice, but who is to say that's a bad thing?